Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leather Supply. We're going to work on a project that we've gotten a lot of requests for. Let's go with a Scottish Sporran. Now, I'll say a Sporran makes a great belt pouch. We'll look at how to do that, but also purse and bag. All right, so anything I use in this video, weaverleathersupply.com, or check below. We've got links there. Going to take you straight to the website. Also, if you want to know when our videos release, just click your notifications. You'll know exactly when these come out. So we've got a longer video here, but we're going to do it right. All right, so let's step over to our pattern table, get started. We've got a little bit more of a complicated pattern on this, but we're going to take it one step at a time. Everything's going to fall into place. We've got digital pics. We'll look at those shortly, but here's what we're doing. So we've got our pocket and we've got our main body, and we'll have a gusset. Now, we could go with just a rectangular or a square pouch. That would make it easy. No, let's dress it up. Let's give it this very cool shape. Now, that looks tough to do. Actually, it's not, because we can work in halves. Not in industry terms, just what I call it. But what I'm going to do is take a piece of paper. Let's fold that over. Okay, so now we have a center line. Let's design our pouch and cut that out. So when we open that up, it's perfectly symmetrical. Now, a cool point here. Say we don't hit that line right on the nose. Maybe it's a little more squared or flat. Well, we're going to think of that as a problem. Actually, it's not, because when we open this up, because it's symmetrical, it's going to look like it was designed that way. We may very well fall into a cool design by making an accident. All right, so over here on our flap, we could bring our flap straight down, and that would look fine. But how about we do this? Let's match the shape of the pocket. So again, let's just fold that over, figure out where we want our bend, fold that over and cut it. And now we've got this very cool design. And again, it's super easy to do. Now, two cool points on this design. Well, first off, our bend is actually down here. So the design is going to go up and over the bend. That's going to look nice. But right here, coolest point. When we snap this, there we go. Because of our design, because of how we've laid this out, our pattern's going to continue onto the pocket. This is a cool design. Okay, one more point. Yeah, enough talking, but one more point. On the back of our main body, we've got a number of holes here. Okay, so right here, if we go this, we can just add a simple belt loop, make it a belt pouch. Well, over here, we've got two rivet holes because we can add in D's with a clip. Now, if we want to do that, I might push those out a little bit so that D hangs off, but I kind of like it right there because it's hidden. What we're going to do though, let's take one of our belt loops. We're going to cut that in half. We'll use that as a billet. That way, our hole is a little bit deeper in our project, which I like, more durability, but that's going to let that D hang off the edge. Okay, digital pics. We've got a lot of measurements here. I'm not going to go over everything, but just a couple of high points. Well, first off, our filigree cuts, our cutouts. These are going to be 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch, or 1.9 by 1.9 centimeters, and our bars, those are going to be 1/2 inch. We're going to give our design 5/8 of an inch all the way around, and we're actually going to bring in our fold, our bend, from the end of our design. We're coming in 3/4 of an inch. On the back, we've got measurements there, both for our D's and our belt loops. Over on our pocket, roughly the same thing, same square sizes, same band sizes, and that 5/8 of an inch all the way around. We've got a gusset there, and then belt loops. We say cut two, but we're only going to cut one. We're going to bust that in half. Okay, so let's step over, start cutting some leather. But before we do that, there's an issue we need to talk about. And this is an issue that plagues every one of us, because in leathercraft, our problem isn't a lack of options, it's an overabundance of possibilities. Here's what I'm talking about. So with our Sporran design, we could always go with a chrome tan. We've got some beautiful chrome tan colors, finishes, textures. Well, 100 possibilities right there. We go with a natural veg tan. How about we stamp that? Add a stamp design. 42 million possibilities. No kidding, I've done the math. We can dye this. We can add antiques. If we go with a neutral antique, I lost count of how many beautiful Angelus colors we have. How about our choice of top coat? Okay, we get all that behind us. Now we've got a liner. This is going to show through. So we need to go with a good color. Our suedes are absolutely gorgeous. How about our hardware color? We've got 6 different finishes of hardware. And over on our thread, we're going to hand sew this. In all honesty, I haven't gotten to that decision yet. We'll pick something out. But let's do this. So right here, this is my family tartan. I'm a Buchanan on my mom's side. So how about we go with a natural veg and a walnut dye? That's going to give it a period look. For our suede, how about we go with a red? That's going to look nice. And for our hardware, how about we go with a nice nickel? We'll figure that out. All right, so I'm going to reset here. Let's cut our main body and pocket. When I have a good pattern, typically I'm going to transfer that over to our pattern sheeting. This is a great pattern material. Easy to mark, easy to cut, but durable. Well, in this situation, I don't make a lot of these, so I'm going to leave this with a poster board. Now on our leather, one of my favorite cuts. This is a single shoulder. It's a great buy for us crafters. It's not an enormous cut of leather, very affordable. And the quality, at Weaver, we've been buying these from the same tannery since day one. So let's start with our gusset. We need 2 inches by 15 inches long. Just so happens, our longer straight edges are 2 inches wide. So let's start over here. What I'd like to do, let's bust a straight edge into this leather. At the same time, we're trimming some of that edge off. And I will always use a straight edge. So, new blade, sharp blade every time. Let's trim. Good, we've got that. Okay, let's set that aside. Now, let's cut our gusset. And again, this is 2 inches wide, so easy to do. Now, we only need half of this, but I use this on all kinds of pouches. So that extra piece, not gonna be scrapped. So let's cut a 2 inch wide band. And we've got that. Good, let's set that aside. Now let's step over to our main body and pocket. What we've done also, we've trimmed a good bit in from the edge. So I know I'm into good leather for our body and our pocket. So let's lay this in. In this situation, we don't necessarily need a straight edge, but nonetheless, that's gonna be helpful. So let's drop that in. Feels like I've got good leather almost right to the edge. So let's drop this in, and we're just going to trace the outside. We're not going to trace our cutouts just yet. We've got that. Okay, again, new blade or sharp blade every time. Let's trim this out. And there we are. Now, we would like these to line up perfectly, but if they don't, it's okay. We're actually going to add a gusset in here. In fact, right here, I could have cut that just a little bit better. Okay, now, for our billets, I want something maybe a little bit heavier than a 4 to 5. This will work if this is all we've got. But what we're going to do, let's reset. I'm going to check my scrap bin, see if I've got something a little bit heavier. As luck would have it, I've got a piece of 5 to 6 ounce natural veg for my scrap bin. 4 to 5, that's going to work for us. But for our billets, I'd like something a little bit heavier. Our wooden strap cutter, this is an inexpensive tool, worth its weight in gold in our shop. It's one of my favorite tools. Now, our belt loops on our pattern are 1 inch by 6 inches. That's a little too wide for a billet. So let's back that down to 5/8 inch by 6 inches. Now, I typically say new blade or sharp blade every time on our knife. Well, that stands true for our wooden strap cutter as well. But if we keep a good blade in this, yeah, look how easy that is. Okay, so let's come back to that right here. We've got our gusset. I'm going to come in from my edge a little bit. Let's cut a straight line. Good. Now, 15 inches long. Let's trim that out. And let's put our finger across. That'll help that keep from kicking out. And right here, we need 2 at 3 inches. Okay, we've got that. Let's step over to our pattern table, cut out our squares. When we're thinking about a cutout or a filigree cut, and in fact, filigree just means delicate cut, but on the surface, this looks like it's going to be tough. Actually, there's one material, makes the whole thing an absolute breeze. We've got a lot of cutting to do here, but absolutely worth it. So let's start right here with our pocket. Let's take our scratch awl. This has got a good sharp point on it. It's going to give us a good line that we'll be able to see. So let's lay this in. Good. Now let's hold that right where it is, And let's just mark our cutouts. And we've got that marked. I think I always miss something, but we can always hold this down. And as long as we're holding it down, we can lift that up. Good, looks like I've got everything. Okay, so while we're here, let's step over and do this piece. And that piece is done, I believe. And I think we've got everything on that one. Now the camera is probably not picking that up, but we're going to correct that. Let's step over to a closer shot because now let's cut these. The one thing that makes this easy is just some packing foam. Most any type of foam will work, but we need a little thickness to it because we're actually going to cut through the leather, but makes the whole thing very easy. So let's start right here. Now again, I don't know if the camera is really picking that up. I think we can see it, but I can see it no problem. Our scratch off is giving us a good line. So what I'm going to do, craft knife, and again, sharp blade or new blade in these every time. So let's just pick one of our squares. Now I've got my line. We can use a straight edge if we want, but I'm going to freehand this. So what I'm going to do is drop that blade down in that line, okay? Now I'm not going to push across. What I'm going to do is lift, and I'm going to saw across that. There we go. How easy is that? Okay, let's flip this around. I'm going to do the other three sides because this isn't just going to fall out. We've got to work with it a little bit, but you'll see what I'm talking about. And there we go. Okay, so nothing difficult thus far, but that's not just going to pop out because when I start off, my blade is at a little bit of an angle. So let's do this. Let's just come back in, and all I'm going to do is clip those corners. And there we go. Now it drops right out. Very clean square. Again, how easy is that with our foam? Okay, so I'm going to cut the rest of this out, and I'm going to do the same over here. Okay, we've got that. Now that takes a little bit of time. That's why I don't make a lot of these. But nonetheless, it looks good and not terribly difficult. Okay, back to our main table. Let's take care of our edges now because we're about to add dye. Well, let's start right here. Let's go with a groover. So on this, I'm going to set this at 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to leave it there for the whole project because we're going to add a chisel line, and I want all of these pieces to meet as best I can. So let's do 2 lines on each of these. Okay, good. So we're at a 5 to 6 and a 4 to 5. Let's go with a number 1 edger, and let's just hit both sides. Okay, we've got that. Remove all of the debris. And let's step over to our gusset. I'm going to do the same thing, both sides. We've got those done. Okay, over to our main body and our pocket. In fact, let's start here. Groove and edge all the way around. And we've got that done. Okay, let's take our 2 little billets, step over to our punch table, mark and round in punch these. We don't really have a pattern for these 2 pieces, but it's relatively easy. We're 3 inches long. Let's come in 1/2 inch from either end. And that's all we need there. Now a revolving punch, this is one of the best buys in the industry. Replaceable tubes. For the money, this is a great revolving punch. So again, we're going to use a rivet here. I want a little bit of a smaller hole, maybe about the 2nd or 3rd tube up. And we've got that, okay? 5/8 inch, it's a little bit of an obscure size, but if we've got a 3/4 inch punch, that's going to work as well. So let's butt to the end. And those are ready to go. All right, let's add some dye. And we are ready to dye. If you're new to leathercraft, I'm certain you didn't expect that level of commitment from a craft. But on a similar note, we too are made out of leather, and we will dye just as well as any veg tan. So if you get some dye on you, hit it with a top coat. It'll look good. You'll be fine. So let's start right here. We're going to dip dye, and we're going with our Pro Dye Walnut. It's the only dye I use, mostly for ease and consistency. So right here, I've got a hook made from wire. That's just inexpensive wire from any hardware store, but I can actually just put 2 billets on that. Let's just dip those in. Good. Let that excess dye drain off. And there we are. Let's set those aside. So right here, I'm going to use the same hook, but on this piece, let's take our time moving through the dye. I want that dye again to be consistent. So let's just dip and slowly run that through. Now I've got a rag at hand. Good. Okay, let some of that excess dye drain off. Now that wicks in so fast, by the time we get it here, there's not much left. But I would like to just mop that up because our dye can run from the bottom of a lot of these squares, and we don't want that. Okay, that looks good. So now I'm going to dye this piece the same way. Then we'll dye our gusset. Those are going to look good. Now, I didn't explain this, but right here I've got just a cheap plastic trash bag to protect my work surface, but I've got some paper, some inexpensive paper. In fact, this is the paper that if you order some leather from Weaver, it's going to come wrapped in this. There's about 10 uses for this in our shop, but if we try to dye straight onto a plastic bag, that becomes a mess. Okay, so on our gusset, we don't have any holes. We don't have any way to get this through. So with situations like this, what I'll do is let's dip that in, pull that out, and now let's continue across. And if we go a little bit slower, we'll never see a line there. But one big problem is if we're using gloves that we've used in dye before, that dye will absolutely transfer over to this project, and we will absolutely see it. Okay, we've got those dyed, so let's give those about 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours dry time. We've given our dye ample time to dry overnight. In fact, notice how consistent that dye is. That's what I'm looking for, and it's so easily done when we dip dye. Right there, I certainly could have made a better cut on that corner. That's going to make me crazy. Okay, so let's go over to our leather balm. This is going to enrich in our dye color. It's going to give it a little bit of gloss, but it's going to make this walnut look good. Now, I like to apply this and buff this with 2 different rags. So right here, I'm going to use some fleece. This comes from sweatpants and sweatshirts, but it's going to hold a lot of the balm in this, so we can do larger projects. Then we'll come back with a simple cotton rag and buff. So let's do this. Let's add balm to everything, then we'll come back and buff. Now, when we add this, I want to go rather sparingly, and what I don't want is streaks and bubbles, because when this dries, we'll be able to see that. Now, it's going to darken our dye color a little bit, but as it dries, that'll come back up. So let's just work our way easily across our gusset. And we've got that. Okay, let's hit our edge. And there we are. Okay, let's set that aside. And let's just knock out our 2 billets. And one more. There we go. Now we're hitting our edges because that darkens the edge, makes it look good. Now when we jump over to this, we're going to use a dauber because I want to hit the inside edges on our squares. But let's start with the top grain and work our balm across this. And we've got that piece done. So now, again, our edges. And across our top. Now, one more thing. I want to get the edges inside of our squares. That's going to darken those. That's going to look really good. So let's just come in and do our best with a dauber just to hit those edges. And it looks like we've got those. We don't have to be absolutely perfect there. And on the back, we're going to cover this with suede. Doesn't really matter what that looks like. Okay, so let's do that, or set that aside. Now we're going to do this one same way. And we've got that done. Okay, so let's give these about 5 minutes, then we'll come back in and buff. Let's buff these out, see how they look. But one good point, this happened on both pieces. As I was using my dauber, I had leather balm drain down across the face. Don't worry about that. It's going to be a darker area, but as it dries, we'll never see that. Okay, so simple cotton rag. Let's buff this out, see how it looks. Well, there we are. We've got a nice gloss on that. Not too much gloss, but again, enriching the dye color. That's a pretty piece. So I'm going to do the same thing to the balance. Well, everything looks good. Okay, so we're going to reset here. Let's cut our suede, get ready to glue that in. We've already made our decision here, but we've got to talk about this. We've got so many beautiful colors of suede at Weaver. Well, first off, the chocolate brown. I like that look, a little more subdued. Same with the black, nice combination. One of my favorites, the rust. Again, that's a beautiful combination. The turquoise would pop. Love the purple. One of my favorites here, the lavender. That would look good. That's a nice combination. And the blue, absolutely, that would pop. We're going with the red because we're matching a tartan, but that's a tough decision. Okay, so with our red suede, what we're going to do is we're going to overcut, glue this down, and then trim this to size. So what I would like is just about a 1/2 of an inch all the way around. And that will work for us. Now we're going to waste a little suede on this, but absolutely worth it. We're going to have a beautiful edge. Okay, step over to our pattern table, add some glue. We're going to use our contact cement, but one big problem here. How do we figure out where we want glue and where we don't? We could mark this, but we'd absolutely see this. One of the great benefits of suede is this. So let's take a suede brush. Let's get that suede to stand up nicely. Now, we can use most any leather for our liner, but very few have this benefit. So I'm going to take this piece, I'm going to lay it in well within, all the way around, and let's just press this all the way around. And let's press the bars, press around these squares. Okay, good. So let's lightly lift this up, and there we are. We know exactly where we need glue and exactly where we don't. But secondly, what I'd like to do is we'll do this again, but I'm going to lay this in, and I'm going to trace lightly. We'll cut that off, but when I'm laying this back down, once we have glue on it, I don't want to have to guess where I'm supposed to be. Okay, so let's rough this up again. Get the debris off of it. Suede is a debris magnet. Okay, let's lay this in. Now let's lightly trace this out. Good, and all told with a pen, that actually holds that line a little further out. We'll trim that off. Okay, let's press this in. I think we've pressed that down very well. Okay, lightly lift that up. There's our pattern, okay? On our bands, we don't have to go right to the edge with our glue. We're going to have a spot at each intersection, so that'll hold that down. But nonetheless, I do want to get glue on our bars. But secondly, out here, I want to make sure I get glue off the edge, over that line, and maybe when we come in, just maybe 3/8 of an inch or 1/2 inch short of our design. So with our contact cement, got to have good ventilation with this, but I love the S18. So let's start on our outside edge. There we go, okay. Let's make sure we get over that edge and just about 1/4 inch, 3/8 short of our design. Good, we're over our edge on the outside line. I just don't want that to separate outside of our stitch line over time. Okay, now between our bars, we just need to dab just a little bit of glue. And that's about all we really need. Okay, we've got glue there. We've avoided our square, so let's set that aside. Now on this piece, we're not exactly sure where we've got glue and where we don't, so let's just do our best to get a full band of glue, and it's relatively easy to do because we've got some body. Now on my outside edge, I do want to go right to the edge, so we can lay this on the edge of our table, and that makes the whole thing very easy. Now we've got a top coat on this, so if we get a little glue on the face, it'll just roll right off. But nonetheless, let's try to be careful with this. Okay, we've got that piece. Now let's give our glue about 5 minutes, let that set. What I'm looking for is this appears and feels dry, but it's good and tacky. That's what we want. Okay, so we've got our ink line here. Let's do our best to land right on that line. And there we go. Let's press that down. That feels like we've got a good bond, and we avoided all of our squares. How about that? Okay, so I'm going to do exactly the same thing on this piece. Our glue has set, so let's bind these two pieces together, do our best to hit our mark. And there we are, no glue, successful all the way around. Now that doesn't look great just yet, but once we trim this outside off, that's going to look good. So let's step over to our main table, trim to size. And one more time, sharp or new blade every time here. Suedes eat blades, they simply do. But what I'm going to do, I don't know if I fully explained this, I'm going to use the body as my straight edge. So I'm going to force the blade against the body, but I'm going to turn the blade out just a little bit so I don't start to cut into the body. But if we do that, we'll get a good cut. Now, when we start to go around a corner, I want to raise my blade up a little bit, so we need to be a little bit more careful there. But even if we don't get that perfectly against the edge, we're going to sandwich that between our body and our gusset so we won't see it. But let's do our best to make a good, even cut. And there we are. That's not bad. Down here, I could have cut that a little bit better, but nonetheless, that looks good. Okay, gonna do the same thing over here. And there we are. Not perfect, but not bad. Okay, let's punch some holes. We're going to use a drive punch, and in fact, this is a great example of why we would use a drive. So over here, we're going to drop in a snap. We can get a revolving punch in there, no problem. But over here, we've got our snap right there. Revolving punch is just not going to get that far in. But with a drive punch, we can sink a hole anywhere we need that. So let's start right here. Let's mark for our snap. Good, we've got that. Now, on our drive punch, we're going to go with a line 24 snap. I would like a hole that's somewhere between 1/8 of an inch and a 3/16. This is a 5/32. That's going to keep our snap snug in the hole, but it's not going to be too tight. There we go. Okay, so over to this piece. We've got a few more holes here. So let's mark for our snap. Good. Now I've got to make sure I've got the right punch. We've got that. Now for our rivets, let's go with 1/8 of an inch drive punch. Again, I want that snug. That's going to give us our most durability. So we're going to mark right here. If we wanted to go with belt loops, we need to mark down here. We've got that. Okay, let's go drop in some spots. Let's add some spots to this project. That is going to look good. So let's start right here on this piece. Now, we've got center lines on our pattern. We could mark from this, but in all honesty, the piece I've cut is not exact to this. So let's eyeball this, but it's going to be easy to do. We want a spot at the intersection of our lines. Well, some of these we can't make. I'll explain. So right here, what I'm going to do, instead of trying to find a center line there and there, let's just look for our center line across there. Easy enough. Easy to find the center, okay? So down here, let's add a spot, and down here, one spot, okay? Let's come down here. Again, I'm trying to hit right on that cross mark. And up here. Now this one would simply be too far out, so we'll drop that one. Down here, we're going to hit there, there. That's our snap. And then one more right there. There, there, and one more right there. And let's double check. It looks like most every other spot would be too far out. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing to our main body. And we've got that piece done. Okay, I'm not going to add any spots again. They would just be too far out. So setting spots, the fastest way to do this, the Little Wonder. That is a great tool. But if we don't have one, we're absolutely not going to let that stop us from setting spots. All we need is an art knife, and I've just got a little pallet of cardboard here because we're going to be pushing through the leather, and that's going to keep us from dinging our blade. So let's start right here. I'm going to take one of our spots. This is our floral spots again. These are beautiful. So I'm going to take this, and let's just find our hole, and I'm going to straddle that hole with my spot and push that through. Okay, I don't know if the camera can see that, but now I've got two little holes there, or two marks. So now, with our art knife, what I want to do is I want to mimic the shape of that tine. So let's come through, but also too, let's don't push this so hard that we have more slit than spot. So I'm going to drop that in, and drop that in. Now, let's flip this around. Again, because this blade is angled, let's come in from the other side. Good. Good. Okay, let's push that spot through. And there we are. That sits flush. Now, I'll set all these. Then we're going to flip these over, come back around. We're going to press that down so it's good and flush. Then we'll bend our tines over. Okay, I've got all those pressed through. So let's flip this over. I'm going to take my knife. Now let's be careful. We got a sharp blade there. But let's just press down and see if we can get those spots to sit as flush as we can make them. Okay, now let's take our craft knife and let's bend our tines inward. And there we are. Not terribly difficult, nor time consuming, but that looks good. Now we've got one more step. Let's take this and drop it on our quartz. Now I'm going to hit or tap each of my spots. But what it's going to do, it's going to force it down in there, and it's going to bring those tines inward. We won't even be able to feel those. Now let's don't hit that hard enough to ding the spot or our leather. But that really is about all we need. Good. Okay, when we flip that over, like I said, I cannot feel those tines. They're not going to snag or grab on anything. Okay, looks good. Now, I brought our snaps out because we've got to go with the Celtic decorative cap, right? So if we drop that in, oh, that looks good. Okay, this is coming together. I'm going to do the same thing to our pocket. And the pocket is done. Well, that looks great. Now, we could drop a spot inside of each square, or maybe in the middle of each band, or we could do all three. But in all honesty, these bands need a stamp design right there. Take this design, make it your own. So many ways we can go. Okay, let's add our snaps. Let's start with our line 24. We're going to go with our decorative cap line 24s. We've got some cool designs in these, but we've got to go with the Celtic design, absolutely. So let's start on our pocket. Let's come through from the back with our post and then the stud. Now our setter set. This is a great buy because this covers us for segment snaps, line 20, line 24, and we've got a rivet setter in here. So let's do our best to set this as straight up and down as we can, and I want that set just enough to where that doesn't spin. Good, that got it. Well, one more. There we are. Okay, notice how that post curled down in there very cleanly. Good, we've got that. Okay, let's do the same thing on our cap. Now, before we set that completely, we need to turn that just a little bit. Good, there we go. Now we can set that, and it looks good. Very nice. Okay, let's step over to our billets. Now we're going to use a medium double cap. That's the 5/16 antique nickel. So let's come through. Good. Let's go with a 5/8 inch D-ring. And there we are. Swing that out. Good. Now, I'd almost like to add 2 rivets here just for durability, but that needs to swing a little bit depending on where our kilt belt chain is coming in. So let's set that. Good. Same on the other side. We are almost done here. All we have to do, chisel line, sew this, and we are finished. So let's reset, get ready to drop in our chisel line. I'm going to do my best to remember everything I've got to say here. We're so close to being finished. Well, first off, we're going to add a gusset. We could simply sew the pocket onto the body. In fact, that looks good. The problem is, looks great, not very useful. We can't get much in that pouch. So we're going to add a gusset. Now, on our face, in my shop, the rule is, if we're lining, we're sewing. So we're going to sew the throat, we'll sew our gusset on, but we're also going to sew around our flap. So right here, let's start with this. We're going to go with our flat chisel. This is my favorite chisel. Now, this gives us a little room for error because down here, when we add this in, I don't want this kicked left or right. We need that to be square. But with this chisel, it's going to be easy to do. But also with this, unlike a diamond chisel, we've got a little room for error there. All right? So let's start across our throat. In fact, why don't we just start in the middle and we'll work our way out. So we've got a groove line there, and I want to do my best. Let's keep that chisel as straight up and down as we can get it. Good. Now I want to make sure, yep, we've got all 4 tines through. So let's put our finger down and let's slowly work that out. Looks good. All right. First tine, last hole. Let's drop that back in our groove. And there we are. Okay. Okay, we're coming up to that point. So let's step down to a 2. Again, I'm going to put the first tine in the last hole, but let's just mark that. Now I know exactly where that tine needs to land. Good. Let's leave that there. Now we could squeeze one more in, but we're going to have a stitch line here. So let's just leave that right where it is. I'm going to work out this way in the same manner. Okay, that looks good thus far. So out here, what I want to do, we'll mark this so that we make sure we get this correct and square. But out here, let's come in. I'm going to put the first chisel, I'm going to butt that against the edge of the project. I'm going to drop my chisel in our groove line. Good. Okay, so now we know we've got a starting point. Let's work our way around. Now, when we start getting down into a curve, we need to jump back down to our 2 tine. Well, we can do this 1 hole at a time. First tine, last hole, drop that in. But what we can do, again, first tine, last hole, let's mark that. There we go. That doesn't make it much faster, but it does help. And our last 4 tine. Well, that came out perfectly. Good. Okay. So now on our body, we need to make sure we've got a good starting point. Let's start right here. Let's just turn these down. Now, we could set those after we get the pouch sewn together, but let's make it easy on ourselves. All right. So right here, we've got our pocket. That's going to sit right here. So let's square that up. All right. On this side, right at the edge of the pocket, I'm going to make a small mark with my awl. Let's take our 2 tine. Now that's outside of our pocket. So let's take the inside of that tine and I'm going to put it right next to that hole. Good. Okay. Now let's make sure we mark this. I'm going to take a little piece of thread with a needle on it. Let's just run through that. And let's just tie that. So now we know exactly where we need to start. We don't really need to mark this side. So let's just tie that. That's all we need. Okay, so now I'm going to work my way all the way around. And one more hole. Again, that comes out almost perfectly. Very nice, okay? Over to our gusset. We're going to do the same thing. So on this end, we're going to come in. Let's go over to our 6 because now we can make up some distance. Again, I'm going to put that first tine on the outside. And let's chisel. Same thing on this side. Now, I need these holes to be parallel, or at least as close as I can make it. So let's do this. Let's add in one more. First time, last hole with our 6. Good. And same over here. Now we can take a square. Almost perfect, okay? I would say let's double check this about every 2 sets with our chisel because we can expand and contract if we need to. Let's do 2 more. Now we want to make sure we get that tine all the way through our leather. That's going to make it easier when we start to hand sew. So again over here, let's check. Again, almost perfect. But here's what I'm talking about. So say this one is a little short. So I can take my 2 tine, I'll mark that, but when I take my chisel, I'm going to put it in that mark, but then I can scoot it out just a little bit. So therefore, we can keep these holes parallel. And that looks good. We are almost there. Let's step over to our pattern table, knock this together. Let's come up to speed on our hand sewing by just sewing across the throat of our pocket. So our sewing pony makes the whole thing so much easier. Now it's designed to sit on this for stability. I like to C-clamp it to my table. I like to sew standing up. I have more reach, better vision, and more upper body strength. Now on our needles, John James, number 18, it's my favorite sewing needle. These are hand sewing needles. No sharp point. That is a big help to us. And our Ritza, we're going to go with a 0.8 millimeter. Now, we could go with a beautiful red, but I almost feel like that's a little too much color. But again, make it your own. So with a saddler stitch, I'm going to go 4 times my length with my thread. I'm going to put a needle on both sides. So let's start right here from our top grain. I'm going to take 1 needle and we're going through that first hole. So let's equal out the distance on our thread, okay? Second hole, I'm going to come from my top grain, open that up. Now, if we did a good job with our chisel, we don't have to open that up. But nonetheless, let's get half that needle through, come through the back side, half our needle. Let's make an X. I'm going to pull the eye down. Let's move our fingers up to our tip and we pull that through. With our tension, I don't want to give this so much tension that this starts to ripple, but I just want to give it enough to where I can see that stitch sink down into that top grain. Second hole. And we're sewing. And we are down to our last hole. Now here we don't have a great place to hide our knot. We will on our main body. But if we put that knot right in this corner, that's a bend. We'll never see that. So let's come through from the front, the last hole. Now back here, let's tie a square knot. So right over left, circle around, pull that down, and left over right, circle around. Now I don't want to pull that down again so hard that it makes that ripple. Okay, we've got that. Now, on either side of that knot, let's bring a needle through and same with the other side of the knot. Good, we've got that. Now, with our knife, we're going to use this part of the blade. I never use that, but I'm not going to cut into my thread. I'm going to pull the thread across the blade. Good, that way we don't cut down into our project. Okay, I'm going to reset. Let's add our gusset. We can start with our gusset on our pocket or our main body, doesn't really matter. But let's do our best to line those edges up and drop that in our pony. Now we'll readjust that because I don't want the pony to tell me where my stitch line's going to land. So let's take one needle and let's go through the first hole. Okay, notice I'm coming backwards a little bit. So let's open this up. There we go. Now let's clip that down. Now we know our holes are going to meet. Okay, so let's sew around now. As we do, good. As we do, this will naturally, the gusset will naturally start to bend around. And we are down to our last hole and we have a perfect fit. Absolutely. Now, one trick here. If we're creating a design, we don't know how long our gusset's going to have to be. Let's do this. Let's chisel our face of our pocket or our back. Then let's count our holes. Now, that sounds tedious. Actually, it's not. Because we can take a 6-tine chisel and just count 6, 12, 18, 24. It'll take no time to count our holes. Then we are assured that we have a perfect length. Okay, so right here we're going to hide our knot. I'm going to come through our gusset. And then I'm going to come through our exterior and our suede. There we go. Now let's hide our knot right down here. And let's clip that thread good. Okay. So let's reset. We'll sew this onto our main body. Now we know exactly where we need to start our gusset. So let's take our thread, and again we're going to use a little clip here just until we get started, but we're going to readjust this as we go so the thread tells us where our edge is going to land and not our clip. So let's come through our first hole, one needle, equalize out our distance. Okay, we've got that. Now let's just do our best to clip that. And again, that doesn't have to stay there long. And again, just little cheap craft clips. Not a lot of strength to them, but just enough to get us rolling. So now let's come through our second hole. Let's tighten that. Good. Okay, now we're on our way. So let's work all the way around. And we've got a perfect meet coming down to our last hole. So again, let's come through our face leather and our suede. And I'm going to come through our gusset and hide our knot right there. And let's clip that. Okay, so now we just have one thing left to sew, and that's our flap. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start one hole in on our gusset. We'll sew around, and then we'll stop one hole in on our gusset and tie our knot there. And there we are. Okay, well that looks good thus far. Let's step over to our main table. We can leave our edges right where they are. That doesn't look bad. But what I would like to do, let's cover that suede. So back to our walnut dye. Now we don't necessarily have to pour this in a bin. I'm just going to use a dauber. So let's get our dauber wet. And I'm just basically going to wick it around the lip of the bottle so we just don't have too much dye in that. Okay, let's come over here, get some more of that dye out. Good. Okay, now let's just lightly hit our edge. Good. Now let's take a rag and just lightly rub off the excess. Now that's a little bit darker, but in about 5 minutes that's going to dry. It's going to look fine. Let's do our throat. And we've got that. Okay, now let's just do the balance. Okay, we've got that. Now let's give that about maybe 15-20 minutes, let that edge dry. We could give our edges a little more dry time, but actually that looks good. Now I've got some paper stuffed into this because our face wants to draw in. The only reason that's happening is we've used a veg tan for our gusset. We could go with a suede or a softer leather. That wouldn't happen. But I want the strength, the body, and the durability of the veg tan. This is going to last for years. But also, the best way to get this to soften up, we wear it, we use it, and we love it. So let's close this and see what happens. And there we are. Our pattern continues across. That's a good looking project. What a great project and a beautiful outcome. The bigger point here, make it your own. There are so many possibilities out there. Have a great time designing it, making it, and absolutely wearing it. All right, one more point. We've got a Sporran. Now we need a kilt belt. I'm on that one. Good luck with your projects.